The first thing he noticed was the silence that lived inside the noise. The city screamed, artillery booming, alien throats tearing the air, men shouting prayers harsh enough to sound like curses, but his mind was a blank room. No system window, no ringing chime, no blue panel flickering at the corner of his vision offering a quest, a penalty, a reward. Nothing. He lay half-buried in a drift of powdered masonry, chest rising and falling under a sky that looked like a wound stitched badly. Ships, alive, obscene, hung like leeches above the hive spires. The ships bled spores that fell as dirty snow, and wherever those spores struck the streets, something with too many teeth and not enough mercy came out. Sun Jinwoo pushed up to his knees. Dust sloughed off his coat. The air bit his lungs with acid and ash and hot metal. He tasted the battlefield, blood, promethium, the thick tang of fear, and waited for the system to line it up into tasks and thresholds. Silence. Another dungeon. He flexed his fingers, feeling the weightless cold that coiled there. The familiar horizon of his shadows just under the skin, or a trap that looks like one. A shout snapped his attention forward. 50 meters away, a barricade of sandbags, ferrocrete blocks, and ragged devotional banners stretched across a broken avenue. Men in flak and carapace leaned into it, cheeks pressed against rifle stocks, faces raw with soot and terror. Their weapons spat red needles of light in disciplined bursts. Each burst sheared a limb, scorched a carapace, chewed a hole in a chest. But the tide kept coming. The tide was claws and bone knives and chitin shining wet. The tide moved as if one mind pushed it. The tide chewed a man in half and kept going before the two halves finished falling. Jinwoo stood, breathing slow, eyes steady, and the silence inside his skull became a taut, expectant line. No system, no quest, no penalty. If this is a dungeon, it's a bad copy. He flicked a glance up at the leech ships, or a different world wearing a dungeon's face. The barricade jolted under an impact. A man vaulted onto the parapet, jacket torn, hat somehow still on his head, a peaked cap with a gold aquila flattened by grime. His jaw was a slash of old scars. A power sword hung at his hip. He took in Jinwoo at a glance and raised a bolt pistol, steady as a verdict. "Identify yourself," he roared. "By order of the Imperium of man." The word Imperium slid into Jinwoo's comprehension as if a translator had whispered it straight to his bones. He didn't know the crest. He didn't know the uniforms. But he understood the fear behind the order, the need to make sense of one more impossible thing. Jinwoo didn't answer. Another part of the street moved. Not men. Not those beasts. A shape like a tank on legs punched out of a collapsed storefront, smashing stone with one lazy shoulder. It was taller than the barricade, broad as an engine block, its head a roof of bone, its scything arms bigger than men. The men at the barricade faltered. The hat didn't. The bolt pistol coughed a hard, meaty sound. Explosive rounds stitched the thing's cheek. Bone chips sprayed. The thing didn't slow. It lowered its head and came on like a train that had never learned brakes. Jinwoo's body remembered his name before his mind did. He lifted a hand. Dark flooded outward from his palm, a sheet at first, then a wave, cool and heavy as deep water. Shadows ran like oil down the rubble, pooling, and then rose in a rank, black line. Their eyes lit blue-white embers. Their hands were knives. Their mouths were nothing. Jinwoo breathed one word, "Arise," and the dead answered. A boy in a flak jacket whose ribcage was open like a book closed stood and picked up his laser gun with calm hands. A woman whose throat had been cut by a claw sealed that red grin, the last breath she never took becoming a blue light behind her teeth. On the enemy side, a slick, twitching thing with a skull as long as a forearm stopped being meat and became obedience. The living men froze. One of them, a broad-shouldered trooper with a chipped tooth and a rope of saints' tokens at his neck, sucked in a prayer and forgot to finish it. "Throne above," he whispered. "Saints guard us." Another soldier, young, freckles under the soot, made the sign of the Aquila over and over as if speed could make it stronger. "Sergeant Doss, what? Eyes front, Kellen." The sergeant barked, but his voice wobbled. The man with the cap, commissar by carriage if not by name, did not blink. He aimed at Jinwoo's head and fired. The bolt round crossed the street in a fist smear of smoke and met night that became stone mid-air. It detonated against the black and vanished. The wall of shadow didn't ripple. "Demon," the commissar said, not shouted, said, a diagnosis, not a question. His pistol tracked from Jinwoo to the waking dead, to the black wave of silent shapes standing where the fallen had been. "By the throne, you will be purged." Jinwoo's hand never lowered. He watched the tank thing, felt the ground change under it, felt the street's memory of every weight that had ever crossed it. Bigger, meaner. "You're the boss here, aren't you?" He sent a thought the way a captain sends a signal along a flag line. The shadows moved. They didn't run. They didn't scream. They slipped. They stepped into places a body should not stand and appeared where a blade belonged. The first rank climbed the tank thing's forelimbs as if ascending a scaffold. Knives slid into seams. Joints found hands on the wrong side of physics. The tank thing, Carnifex, bellowed. It shook 3 shadows off. It crushed one under a hoof, big as a door. The shadow broke like smoke and knitted itself again mid-air. Jinwoo closed his fingers. The black wave folded into a shape. It rolled up the Carnifex like a tide, swallowing a pier, and forced its head sideways until bone creaked. The crete paste of the street squealed under their weight. The beast's lower jaw warped. Its breath stank like hot vinegar and rot. "Now," Jinwoo said quietly, "a shadow soldier, once a human woman, now a blade with a memory, drove her bayonet under the beast's jaw where armor turned to throat. A black gaunt stabbed an eye. Another shadow slid an arm elbow deep into an armpit and came out with a handful of vital, which became nothing in his grip. The Carnifex hammered the ground with both forelimbs. Pavement slabbed upward. The barricade shuddered. Men flinched. The commissar held his stance like a nail in a storm. The beast's legs failed at the same time. It crashed to its knees with a sound like a falling cathedral and, for the first time, hesitated. Jinwoo raised his hand slightly, as if testing the weight of a new blade. "Arise." The Carnifex went still. Its eyes, great glittering pearls of hate, dimmed and then rekindled in the wrong color. Blue-white rolled through its skull like frost. It stood again in a smooth, unnatural motion, breathing steam into the hot air, towering over the street in silence. The living men did not cheer. Nothing in them could recognize this as victory. The commissar holstered his pistol, hand steady by force, and drew his power sword, the generator whining as a blue corona walked the edge. "On your knees," he called across the distance, voice carrying like iron. "Name yourself. Submit to Imperial sanction." Jinwoo watched him. The sword, the cap, the stance bent toward duty like a tree bent toward a cliff and refusing to fall. You are brave, he thought without judgment, and you are small, standing in front of that tide. He did not kneel. Another wave of the alien swarm flooded the intersection from a side street. Smaller creatures with scythe arms that moved like razors on strings, slick bodies breathing foam. The Carnifex, his Carnifex, turned its head sharply toward them and waited. Jinwoo's voice did not rise. Go. The black titan plunged through the side street like a battering ram, and the smaller creatures met it like sleep meets a hammer. It smashed, crushed, tore. It did not roar. It did not need to. Behind it, the shadows moved with it in a long, slow curve, a pocket of silence that ate anything living it touched. Jinwoo's attention returned to the men at the barricade. The broad-shouldered trooper with the saint's tokens looked at him, then at the commissar, then back at him. He licked lips, cracked white at the corners. "Sergeant," he said, not taking his eyes off Jinwoo. "What do we do?" Sergeant Doss swallowed, throat working. 35, maybe 40, left ear torn years ago, a father scar under the grime. He kept his laser gun trained at Jinwoo's chest, as if that mattered. "We hold," he said. We don't run. We don't shoot unless the commissar says." "Kellen, stop shaking, I'm not..." The freckled boy tried to stop his hands, couldn't, clutched the gun harder to make the shaking happen in his shoulders instead. "Sergeant, he raised Miklos. I saw Miklos stand up. I saw his throat. I saw," Doss said. His voice softened a little. "I saw." From the far end of the barricade, a Vox operator, thin, hollow-eyed, a wet cough riding his breathing, held the handset away from his head as if it bit. "Sir," he barked at the commissar. "Choir reports. I don't know what they're reporting. They're all talking at once. They said a phrase, and then they compose yourself, guardsman," the commissar said without looking away from Jinwoo. "Speak cleanly." "They said," the Voxman flinched at something only he could hear, then pushed on. "They said Rex Umbrarum." Then they started bleeding from their eyes. Sir, the commissar didn't move, his jaw set. His gaze flicked once to the Carnifex carving a path down the side street, and then back to the man who had done it with a word. "Shadow King," he translated harshly, as if choking on the syllables. "Heretic Majesty." Jinwoo's mouth twisted in something that could have been a smile if he cared to finish it. "You name things to hold them still," he thought. "You won't hold me." He stepped off the rubble pile and walked toward the barricade. The men behind it reacted like a single animal, a contraction, a flinch, weapons rising. Doss hissed through his teeth, "Hold, hold." Kellen's finger tightened on the trigger by accident, then left it by will. The commissar took one step forward out of the barricade and met Jinwoo halfway, sword angled so its glow painted his sleeve. Up close, his scars were a map of places fear had already tried and failed to live. "Do you understand me?" he asked, voice low enough that it didn't belong to the battle anymore. "Do you understand what you've done?" Jinwoo stopped 2 paces away. He could smell oil on the man and old leather that had seen rain and the copper of fresh blood. He could feel the panic of the men behind the commissar as heat on his skin. He heard his own breath, measured and easy. He heard nothing else in his skull. "I understand the pieces," he said. "I don't know the board." "Board? The rules," Jinwoo said. "Who owns this place? Who dies to defend it? Who thinks they get to make the decisions?" He tipped his head at the barricade, at the tatters of banner, at the saints' tokens twined around the big trooper's neck. "What you believe buys you. Faith buys endurance," the commissar said. "Sanction buys justice. The emperor buys everything else. The emperor." Jinwoo tried the word. It sat foreign in his mouth and familiar in his bones, a shape of devotion he recognized from other worlds. Is he here? He is everywhere. The Commissar's eyes narrowed a fraction. Not that you need his presence to meet your end. Jinwoo considered several answers and left them all unspoken. No system, no panel, no rails. They don't know dungeons. They only know war. He glanced past the Commissar at the young one, Kellen, whose hands trembled on his gun. At Doss, whose jaw worked like he was grinding anger into a powder he could swallow. At the Saints Tokens man, who kept looking at the Carnifex like it might come back and ask him a question. They are doing their best with a world that hates them. He felt the shadows waiting in his palm like a tide in a harbor, wanting the moon's pull. "Don't kneel," the Commissar said almost softly, as if reading the thought he needed to force out of the air before it formed. "Don't speak oaths. Don't beg. Whatever you are, be honest with it." Jinwoo's eyes found his. Two quiet men met in a place that had run out of quiet. "I don't kneel," Jinwoo said, not like a boast, like a weather report. The Commissar nodded once. "Then we will do our duties." He stepped back and raised the sword to full guard. "Sergeant Doss." "Sir." "If this thing moves, you fire. If it does not fall, you keep firing. If your gun runs dry, you throw the gun and use your bayonet. If you die, I will remember you correctly. Do you understand me?" "Sir." Doss's voice steadied as it got louder. "We understand." The Carnifex shadow returned from the side street at a trot that should have been impossible. The front of its chest painted in something that looked like tar and meat. It halted behind Jinwoo like a statue that had learned obedience. A gaunt shadow perched on its back like a pet hawk, head tilted, eyes burning. Doss's breath left him in a grunt. Kellen whimpered despite gritting his teeth against the sound. The Saints Tokens trooper, Gillet, made the sign again, slower, like he meant it. "Stop," Jinwoo said. He wasn't talking to the men. He was talking to the air. The alien tide had pulled back for a heartbeat, gathering itself for another push. In that space, between breaths, between volleys, between decisions, the street remembered that it used to be a place where people went to work, where children ran errands with coins folded in their palms, where someone sold hot bread from a cart. The street breathed in. Jinwoo breathed with it. No system, no arrows pointing to an exit, no numbers. "So I test. Talk to me," he said to the Commissar. "Tell me what I'm standing in." The Commissar blinked once. "Hive City, Pi Theta 9 of the Ecclesiarchal Prefecture," he said mechanically, and then his voice found blood. "Once. Now it's an abattoir under Tyranid assault. Designation Leviathan Remnant. Tendril unknown. We are the 18th Boros line. We hold because the throne demands it. Your gods are busy," Jinwoo said. "Our god is not a plural." The Commissar's lip curled, then smoothed. "And he doesn't get busy. He endures. Do you?" "Yes," the answer was immediate, not pride. Just truth spoken in the tone duty uses. A smaller shape detached from the barricade's shadow. A woman in a medic's apron, stained brown and black, her hair shaved to the scalp, a patch sewn on her shoulder that had once been white. She slid along the parapet and dropped down on the Commissar's flank like a shadow that meant well. "Sir," she said, "if you're going to die in front of my station, do it 10 steps to the left so the drainage is easier." The Commissar's mouth almost twitched. "Corporal Hera, demonstrating your usual indiscipline. Demonstrating triage logistics." Hera's eyes skated over Jinwoo, caught on the Carnifex, moved back to Jinwoo and held. Her lips parted. "Saints help us. What are you?" Jinwoo didn't answer her. His eyes flicked to her hands, steady, calluses in the right places, fingers stained with iodine and something darker. She had saved 100 men and lost 1,000 and kept both tallies somewhere she could reach, not somewhere she could forget. Kellen found his voice in a thin strip. "Are you a demon?" Jinwoo turned his head, and the boy flinched as if a hand had brushed his hair. "I am not of your gods," Jinwoo said. "Then of whose?" Guile's voice came out hoarse. He clutched his saint's tokens until his knuckles whitened. Jinwoo thought of two sets of eyes, a father's gentle disappointment, a monarch's ruthless calm. He thought of the way the system had once written his future in numbers, and how he had broken that as easily as stepping off a curb. "Mine," he said. "I belong to me." The commissar breathed out through his nose like a man who had just accepted that a storm would knock his roof off, but decided the dishes still needed washing. "Irrelevant to imperial law." "Everything about me is irrelevant to your law," Jinwoo said, and the line came out without heat. "That's your problem," the Vox operator hissed. Sir, the choir..." "Use words," the commissar said, eyes not leaving Jinwoo. "They stopped," the Voxman whispered. "All of them." The astropath Primus said the phrase again. "Rex Umbrarum." Then she laughed. He swallowed bile. Then she died. Kellen's knuckles went whiter. Doss's jaw moved. Slow grind. Hera looked at the sky as if trying to locate an exit hatch. The commissar set his feet. "This changes nothing. It changes everything," Jinwoo said, almost gently. "You just don't know it yet." The alien wave returned. Screams, claws, the living tide. A barrel-jawed beast with a crown of horn shouldered through the front rank. Smaller razor-armed things running underfoot like sharks under a whale. The Carnifex shadow turned to meet it, lowering its head in a mirror that would never show reflection, only decision. Jinwoo didn't look back. He saw enough in the tilt of the alien horn, the weight of its steps, the way its mind pushed the others to make room. Another boss. He let the shadow tighten and the boss gnash into each other in the side street, felt the ground buckle, tasted dust. He kept his eyes on the men. "Sergeant," he said. Doss startled, as if he had been slapped. "What?" "Tell me your losses. The numbers." Doss looked down the line, voice suddenly catching in his throat in the way men's voices do when they drag something heavy off their heart. 43 at muster, 9 wounded, 17 dead, 2 missing. He blinked, recalculating. A habit. 3 missing, Cora said quietly. 5 missing. Counting the 2 you can't face. She didn't look at him when she said it. She looked at the street. Doss's jaw flexed. He didn't argue. Jinwoo nodded once. "All right." He lifted his hand again. Kellen gasped. Gui whispered something under his breath that sounded like two saints arguing. The commissar shifted his weight half a degree, blade line never wavering. Jinwoo pointed at a trauma tarp folded on the ground, behind the barricade. "That one." The medic's third in line, the man under it with the scar through his eyebrow. Hera flinched as if he had tapped her shoulder. "You didn't see. How did you?" "Arise," Jinwoo said softly. The tarp jumped. A man's arm pushed it up as if surfacing from a black river. Fingers spread. The tarp slid away. A soldier sat up with a sharp, wet intake of breath, eyes blazing blue. The wound that had opened him from hip to ribs was a shadow river now. Edges clean, the middle a moving night that belonged to someone else. He blinked, looked at Hera first, like men often do, toward the voice that had said his name last, then looked down at his own body without panic. The blue in his eyes didn't flicker. Hera took half a step forward and then stopped like a dog at a boundary. "Miklos," she whispered. "No." The soldier, Miklos, looked at her, looked past her at Doss, then stood, smooth, deliberate. He picked up his laser gun. He checked the charge with hands that had done it 1,000 times. He took his place in the line between Kellen and Gile without needing a command. Kellen's throat made a sound that didn't belong to words. Gile's saint's tokens clicked softly. Doss's eyes shone wet for a breath and then blinked dry. The commissar said, "You will cease." Jinwoo looked at him. The man's face was still a blade. Only the jaw muscle murmured a complaint. "If you fire on my dead," Jinwoo said, "you will lose faster." "Faster is irrelevant if inevitable," the commissar said. "But you misunderstand me." He flicked his sword toward the alien tide. "Allow them to walk your line, and I will let them. Allow them to walk mine, and I will put them down." "Mercy ends at the parapet," Jinwoo studied him, then nodded as if marking a boundary on a map. A rippling crack like tearing plate announced the Carnifex duel's conclusion. The alien boss slid sideways into view, one horn broken, chest a ruin. The Shadow Titan stepped with it, forced it to the street, and held its head there without flourish. The living boss thrashed. The Shadow boss did not. "Arise," Jinwoo called, not turning, and a second later a blue glare lit the side street like a new moon. The living boss went still. Then it stood. Two titans in black stepped out into the boulevard and waited, heads tilted slightly toward Jinwoo like dogs waiting for a whistle. The line did not break. The men did not run. None of them spoke. The sound of their breathing became part of the city's weather. Jinwoo let the quiet sit. No system, he thought again. No authority but what I make and what I steal. He looked at the commissar, the stubborn, straight line of him, the old scars earned face forward, and weighed something that had nothing to do with pity and everything to do with calibration. "What is your name?" he asked. The commissar held his eyes. "Commissar Alaric Voss." "And yours," Jinwoo said to Doss without looking away from Voss. "Sergeant Micah Doss." Jinwoo nodded at Hera. "Hera," she said. "Just Hera." She hesitated. "Corporal, if you care." "Kellen," the freckled boy said in a rush, almost tripping over the syllables as if they might bite if left on the tongue too long. "Kellen Sarv." "Gila," the big trooper said, voice rough and tired as if names were tools and he was out of better ones. "Good," Jinwoo said. He let their names sit in his chest for a beat, adding weight to the balance. "If I am trapped here, the board has pieces I can use, or at least should not waste." He looked at Voss again. "There is no exit I can see. From this city?" Voss asked. "From this dungeon," Jinwoo said. Voss's mouth tightened a fraction. "There is no dungeon," he said. "There is only the Imperium and its enemies." Jinwoo's lips quirked. "Then I will have to decide which I am, or make a third category." "Heretic," Voss said softly, and in his mouth it meant separate, not evil. "Separate," Jinwoo agreed. "For now." Hera exhaled, a shaky laugh she didn't mean. "Saints, I'm going to die sober." "Not if you stay behind the line," Doss said, automatic. Hera wiped her palms on her apron. "And if the line keeps moving, it won't," Doss said, then quieter. "It can't." The Vox crackled. The operator flinched, then forced his hand to the set. "Sir, command channel, new advisory, inquisitorial packet authenticated." Voss took the handset without taking his eyes off Jinwoo. "Voss," he said and listened. His face did not change, but the air around him seemed to realize it was touching iron. He handed the set back. "Orders stand," he said. "We hold." We mark and report all anomalous behavior. He let the last 2 words sit like stones. We await further sanction. He looked at Jinwoo. For a heartbeat it felt like the axe and the block had agreed to be polite. Rex Umbrarum, Voss said, testing the phrase as if it were a blade he might decide to use. They are calling you that already. I didn't ask them to. You didn't need to, Voss said. Men name things that frighten them so they can call to it in the dark and pretend the sound makes them safe. Jinwoo looked past him to the city, to the veins of streets running black with smoke and life and death, to the sound of the Carnifex shadows settling, to the glare of blue eyes along the barricade where Miklos stood among his living brothers like a question. He thought again of the system's absence. The edges of his mouth went flat. If this world will not tell me what it wants from me, I will make it tell me what it is. He turned away from the barricade, raising his hand to point down the avenue where the tide gathered alien silhouettes stacking into one more wave. His voice was quiet. Forward, the shadows moved like a tide that had discovered purpose. Voss's sword dipped a fraction, acknowledgement or fatigue. He stepped back into the line. Boros 18th, he called, voice climbing clean into the ruin's throat. You heard the saint of blasphemy. Forward, on my mark, fire by ranks. Keep your faith on safety and your wits loaded. We hold. Doss grinned without humor. You heard the commissar, he said. Kellen, if you shoot me in the back, I'm coming back like him and chewing your ear off. Kellen made a noise that might have been a laugh and might have been something you lose in childhood and never get back. Miklos, eyes blue and steady, nodded once, the kind of nod that has no adjectives. They moved. The street narrowed to an argument. The air overheated. The alien tide broke on the shadow wall and spattered into shapes. Jinwoo walked at the center, the silence inside him intact, the lack of the system now a weight he carried like a second spine. Across the world, in rooms without windows, men and women with their eyes sewn shut so that sight would not distract them bled freely from noses and ears and spoke Latin that had never lived in their mouths. Rex Umbrarum, they said, voice on many channels all at once. Rex Umbrarum. On a cruiser in high orbit, a rosette-shaped seal impressed wax on a parchment that had already decided to be an order. A voice, cool and precise, spoke to a room that had been designed to make men feel smaller. Record the designation, said Lord Inquisitor Kalis. We name what we will destroy. And down on the street, where names either mattered too much or not at all, Sun Jinwoo lifted his hand and the city learned how to obey a shadow. The warp screamed, not in one voice, nor in one place. It was a choir of agony sung across the galaxy, astropaths writhing in their sanctums as if someone had poured molten iron down the conduits of their souls. From the segmentum solar to the ragged edges of the eastern fringe, psychers bled and broke beneath a single echo carried on currents no emperor had ever sanctified. Rex Umbrarum. The words bled from their mouths in languages they had never studied. Monks collapsed in candlelit choirs. Navigators clawed at their own foreheads. Choir masters scribbled nonsense into their logs until their hands snapped. And when the voices failed, when throats ruptured and tongues fell slack, the silence that followed felt worse, like the galaxy had named something it wished it hadn't, and now refused to repeat it. Lord Inquisitor Kalis read the reports without changing expression. The chamber was bare stone, veined with copper sigils, its air heavy with incense that failed to hide the reek of blood from the astropath Primus who stood before him. Her eyes were pits of melted wax. Red trickled down her chin where a vessel had burst in her skull, but she bowed low anyway, robes sagging. "They spoke with one voice, Lord," she rasped. "Every channel, every choir, all at once." The phrase came through as if pressed into us. "Rex Umbrarum." And then silence. Behind Kalis, his acolytes waited in half-shadow. Severin, the youngest, shifted uneasily, his hands white on his slate. "A demon prince?" he asked, as if naming it might shrink it. Kalis turned his head just enough that one pale eye met him. "No, a prince requires a father. This one carries no lineage but itself," Severin swallowed. "Then what is it?" Kalis returned his gaze to the hololithic display. Fragmented Vox logs, scrambled pics, desperate signals from Pi Theta 9, reports of soldiers standing after death, shadows wielding laser guns, a carnifex fighting for the humans, lines scrawled in Sergeant Doss's blocky code, fragments of Commissar Voss's clipped dictation, always the same, an unknown asset. Always followed by silence where further description might have lived. "What it is," Kalis murmured, "we will define by the scale of what it breaks." He clasped his hands behind his back. "Prepare a writ. Summon the Ordo Malleus. I will have the Grey Knights." The room chilled at the words. The Ordo Malleus did not mobilize lightly. The Grey Knights were called only when demons of high power broke into real space. Their presence was itself an admission that faith alone could not suffice. Far below, in the broken hive city, Sun Jinwoo sat beneath the shadow of a ruined spire. The Carnifex shadows loomed behind him, silent as mountains. Rows of resurrected guardsmen stood in perfect stillness, laser guns at their sides, eyes burning blue. Among them walked shapes with too many arms and too much hunger, tamed now into silence. On the barricade opposite, the living soldiers did not rest. They stared, wide-eyed, the air around them hot with fear and prayers muttered so low they were half-breath. Every shift of shadow felt like a blade being drawn. Jinwoo ignored them. His attention was on his own hand. He flexed his fingers. Darkness seeped in and out like smoke. It was his power, yes, but thicker here, heavier. Every summon had felt like pulling stone from a riverbed instead of water from the air. Something resisted him, something pushed back. The system is gone, the architect is gone, yet the shadows still answer. But this place hates me. He clenched his fist. The pressure did not fade. "This world hates me," he murmured. "Good," came a dry voice. Jinwoo lifted his gaze. Commissar Alaric Voss stood a few paces away, power sword still humming softly in his grip. His hat was gone, lost in the fighting, leaving scars bare on his face. His eyes were steady, the stare of a man too stubborn to blink. "Hatred is the Imperium's most honest language," Voss said. "If it hates you, it understands you." Jinwoo studied him, unblinking. "And you? Do you understand me?" "I understand you are dangerous." Voss's mouth twitched as if considering whether to add more. "That is enough." Behind him, Sergeant Doss shifted uneasily, trying not to look at Miklos, his resurrected comrade, standing stiff and silent at the line. Kellen refused to look at Jinwoo at all, his eyes fixed on his boots, hands shaking around his laser gun. Hera, the medic, lit a low stick and drew in smoke as if it were air itself, while Gillier fingered his tokens like a man braiding a noose. Doss finally spoke. "You can kill the Xenos. You can raise our dead. You can fight without tiring. Saints, you can command them. Then why are we still here? Why aren't you tearing through the whole hive yourself?" Jinwoo's head tilted. His answer was calm, unhurried. Because I don't know what I want from this world yet." The words landed like stones in water. Ripples of silence spread. Hera blew out smoke and let out a bitter laugh. "Saints. That's the scariest thing you could have said." Jinwoo almost smiled. Hours later, Kalis walked the length of his sanctum, robes whispering against the floor like low tide. Acolyte Severin trailed 2 steps behind, data slate clutched close. "The Grey Knights are mobilizing?" Severin asked. "Yes." Kalis's voice was flat iron. "If this Shadow King is a demon, they will banish him. If he is not, then we will learn what he is when they fail." Severin hesitated. "And if they die?" Kalis did not stop walking. "Then we name him more carefully." The next assault came with the sound of 1,000 blades on stone. The Tyranid swarm poured down the avenue again, gaunts screeching, warriors shouldering through the wreckage. At their center came another carnifex, plated thicker, tusks wet with gore. The guardsman braced. The commissar raised his sword, and Jinwoo stood. His hand rose, shadows already gathering, but he paused. He watched the soldiers at the barricade, their fear, their trembling hands, their faith so brittle it looked ready to shatter. "Sergeant!" Jinwoo called. Doss jerked as if struck. "What? Tell me you're dead." The names Doss froze. The men beside him stared. "My lord, The names," Jinwoo repeated, calm as stone. "Say them." Doss's voice caught, then ground forward. Private Kellen Rorick, Guardsman Lisa Van, Trooper Rowan Miklos, his jaw tightened, and more. "Too many. Too many is not an answer," Jinwoo said. "Say them," Hera whispered. "Saints." Doss swallowed. His throat bobbed. Then he spoke, voice rough, each name like gravel pulled from his chest. One by one, he listed them, every soldier who had fallen since the battle began. His words cracked, his breath hitched, but he said them all. When he finished, Jinwoo closed his eyes. The silence was heavy. "Good," Jinwoo murmured. "Now watch." He stretched out his hand. "Arise." The ground shivered. From rubble, from broken barricades, from the heaps of fallen bodies, shadows poured upward. Soldiers with torn uniforms and shattered armor stood again, eyes blazing blue. They moved to the line, shouldering weapons, standing beside the living as if they had never left. The living guardsmen recoiled. Some cursed, some wept. But the line looked whole again. Commissar Voss's sword did not waver. His voice cut through the silence. "You will not let them walk past this line. Do you understand me?" Jinwoo's eyes flicked to him. "If they fight, they will hold. If they fall, I will raise them again." "Then we understand each other," Voss said. The Tyranids crashed into the shadows. The Carnifex bellowed, smashing bodies aside. Jinwoo raised his hand, and his own Carnifex shadow surged forward to meet it, the two titans slamming together like continents colliding. The battle roared, the shadows fought, and Jinwoo stood calm at the center, his expression unreadable, the silence in his mind deeper than ever. Far away, in the eye of terror, the ruinous powers stirred. Korn snarled approval at the slaughter. Tzeentch whispered of possibilities, coveting the shape of this alien monarch. Slaanesh shivered in delight at the obedience of shadows. Nurgle chuckled, already dreaming of rot stitched into this new king. But they could not touch him. Jinwoo's essence did not bleed into the warp like other souls. His shadows obeyed no chaos god. He was a sovereign unto himself, and that frightened them more than they would ever admit. That night, when the guns fell silent for a breath, Jinwoo dreamed. He dreamed of Seoul's streets, empty, of dungeons long since cleared, of the architect's throne abandoned. He dreamed of shadows that no longer obeyed without question, but whispered back, "What do you want of us, monarch?" And beneath it all, he heard the same voice the astropaths had screamed, Rex Umbrarum, the Shadow King. He woke with his hand clenched, shadows trembling at his fingertips, and the silence in his head heavier than ever. On the Aegis Votum, Kalis sealed the writ with his rosette. His voice was quiet, but the acolytes around him felt the air tighten. "Record the designation," he said. "Rex Umbrarum, the Shadow King. We name what we will destroy." The gunships came in low, shoulders hunched against the wind. From the barricade, Sergeant Doss watched them knife through smoke, sleek black birds with red ecclesiarchal wax still sealing their hull sigils. Their engines spoke in the clipped consonants of authority. Servo skulls preceded them like pale scouts, candles guttering in iron jaws, lenses painting the ruins with invisible grids. "Not guard," Hera said, ash of her low stick trailing. "Too clean." Commissar Voss didn't answer. His eyes were already on the largest craft as it flared, slewed and settled amid a storm of dust. Its ramp dropped with a judicial thud. Men in sober black filed out in an order that could not be taught, only forged. Stormcoats, carapace under cloth, rosettes hidden against the chest as if modesty could make them less absolute. A censer swung from one belt, trailing incense that bullied the stink of battle aside. At their center walked a tall, narrow man, whose movements made space behave. He wore no hat, no crown, no laurel, only a plain mantle and a pale face that looked carved to hold conclusions. A slender null rod rode at his spine like a second thought. He did not glance at the dead titans kneeling like statues behind Jinwoo. He did not look away either. "Who?" Kellen started. "Inquisition," Gilly said, and every syllable found the place's fear had kept warm. Voss stepped forward, sword unlit, but drawn. He made the sign of the Aquila as if etching it into the air with his bones. "Boros 18th salutes the throne," he called. "Commissar Alaric Voss, identify and state writ." The tall man stopped 3 paces away, small retinue fanning out, without seeming to move. A skull drone hovered at his shoulder, red lamp blinking in a heartbeat that was not its own. When he spoke, the words arrived calm and exact, like tools laid in a row. "Lord Inquisitor Kalis, Ordo Xenos empowered, Ordo Malleus invoked, writ, reconnaissance, classification, sanction." He turned his head just enough to take in the barricade, the men, the medics station, the Shadow Legion standing in polite silence. "You will brief me." Voss's jaw tensed. "We hold the avenue. Tyranid assaults in waves. Civilians, none. Water, contaminated. Munition, insufficient." He didn't look at Jinwoo when he said, "Anomalous asset manifests control over the dead and repurposes Xenos corpses as weapons. Asset exhibits no warp stink detectable by lay senses." Kalis's eyes touched Jinwoo properly for the first time. It was not a stare. It was an instrument. Sun Jinwoo sat where he had been, on the tilted plinth of a broken statue, one hand on his knee, the other open on the stone beside him, as if weighing an invisible coin. The 2 Carnifex shadows crouched behind like patient animals. 50 resurrected guardsmen stood in a line that would have made a parade square jealous. He did not speak. He watched. Kalis approached until the air between them felt measured. A woman from his retinue, tall, gaunt, with a brass torque pressed to the skin of her throat, took 1 step to the side and tightened a chain attached to the collar of a psyker kneeling in a restraint harness. The psyker's eyes were blindfolded with sanctified gauze. His lips moved anyway, whispering a multiplication table of litanies. Kalis didn't look back. "Keep the choir bound, interrogator," he said mildly. "If the thing is what I suspect, it does not wish to be sung to." "Yes, Lord," the woman murmured. Kalis stopped 2 paces from Jinwoo. Up close, the monarch's presence was not a heat or a smell. It was a pressure that reminded the bones they were hollow. "Do you understand me?" Kalis asked. Jinwoo met his eyes. "Yes." "Good. Then we can skip the theater." Kalis folded his hands behind his back. "You will answer with precision." "I am not the man you lied to." Jinwoo considered that. "I prefer not to lie. Not lying and telling the truth are different sports." Kalis nodded toward the waiting shadows. "Origin." Jinwoo's gaze tipped briefly to the sky where the leech ships hung like rosaries carved from meat. "Not here." "Not where," Kalis said. "But that is sufficient for this meter." He inclined his head a fraction. "Compact, who claims you?" "No one." Jinwoo flexed his fingers. Darkness pooled and withdrew like an obedient tide. "I am not of your gods." "Nor theirs," Kalis said, soft. Not quite a question. Jinwoo's mouth made something like a smile and decided against it. "No." Voss's sword hummed to life, just a whisper of charge, a reminder to the air that steel could matter. Kalis didn't turn. "Stand easy, Commissar." "I am standing," Voss said evenly. Kalis let it pass. He looked at Jinwoo again. "Then we must build you a category. Tell me what you want." Jinwoo's head tilted, as if listening to a term he had assigned homework. "To understand the board," he said. "There were always rules, where I came from. A system, quests, penalties. This world offers none. So I am testing." Kalis's lashes lowered in something that was almost approval. Honest. He half turned his head toward the barricade. "Commissar Voss, how many civilians remain in this hive?" "None that we can save," Voss said. "The Tyranid digestion pools are industrious." Kalis logged it without flinch. "Then my tactical quandary simplifies." He faced Jinwoo again. "Asset. You can assist the Imperium in the destruction of the Xenos in this sector, after which we will determine your classification. Or you can obstruct, in which case I burn this hive to a template and have a warship swat the ash." Hera made a noise under her breath that might have been a curse and might have been a prayer. Doss didn't breathe. Jinwoo did. "You burn often. We remember correct things," Kalis said. "The Imperium endures by subtraction." "Subtraction is one way to win a game," Jinwoo said. "Not the only way." Kalis's mouth did not move. "Prove a second." Jinwoo stood, unhurried. The Carnifex shadows rose with him, stone relearning an old fear under their feet. He glanced at Voss, at Doss, at Kellen and Guila and Hera, and let their names recollect in his chest. Pieces on the board, some mine, some not. He looked back to Kalis. "Walk with me." The interrogator's hand lifted in a small, invisible signal. On the rooftops, 3 figures that had been shapes became men in ghillie cloaks, scopes already online. A whisper down an encrypted channel. "Melta charges armed. Pattern Theta around the plaza. Detonation on double confirm." The skull drone bobbed, docile and stupid, and recorded every angle. Kalis didn't look at any of it. 2 paces, he said to Jinwoo. "No, nearer. If you close to 1, the world becomes very loud." "I don't like loud." Jinwoo kept the distance and turned down the avenue where the last tide had broken. The shadows trailed, falling into a loose flank formation that was somehow respectful. "You threatened burning. You brought charges. You called your silver knights and kept them on the leash, out where I can't smell their prayers. You prefer parley to spectacle." Kalis's eyes flicked. A faint admission. "Spectacle is for men who need to convince themselves. I need only be correct. They walked. On either side, the city leaned in to listen. Buildings peeled to their ribs. Statues leaned as if they had started to kneel and changed their minds halfway through the motion. A saint's hand lay on the paving stones, palm up, catching ash. "You are measuring me," Jinwoo said. "I am measuring your bottom," Kailas said. "Top can be manufactured. The floor is the truth. And if my floor is deeper than you can sound," Kailas's smile barely raised the corner of his mouth, "then I adjust my line." He stopped beside the husk of a cathedral that had once been painted with saints. Now it wore smoke. He gestured toward the open doors. Inside, Voss was there first, as if his bones had been sent ahead. He positioned himself just off the threshold, not blocking either man's path, a hinge rather than a bar. Doss and Hera moved to the side nave, with the economy of people making their own cover out of furniture and faith. Kellen watched the Carnifex shadows with a child's stubborn fascination. Gui kissed one of his tokens and pretended not to. The nave was a long, wrecked mouth. Pews lay on their backs, ribs up. 1,000 shards of stained glass turned the floor into a map of lost color. Jinwoo's footsteps didn't sound. Kailas's did. "Who taught you to command the dead?" Kailas asked. "No one," Jinwoo said. "The power came with the crown. There is no crown on your head." "It doesn't fit there," Jinwoo said mildly, "and yet you do not claim the name they give you." Jinwoo's eyes traced the broken saint over the altar. Two halves set together earlier, a memory of wholeness. "Names are a kind of cage," he said. "I'm not ready to sit still." Kailas nodded, as if adding a column properly to an abacus. "Good. The men who name themselves are either frauds or emperors. I prefer neither on Tuesdays." From the side of the nave, the interrogator's voice. "Lord." She was looking at a data slate, eyes narrowed. "Secondary, psychic disturbance on a vector east of our position, not Tyranid. Pattern, discordant." Kailas didn't look up. "Define." "Sharp, cold, like a blade dragged through wool." She swallowed. "Null adjacent." Jinwoo's head tilted. The shadows behind him shifted, as if smelling weather. "Your knights," he said to Kailas. "Not here yet." "No." Kailas's gaze moved past him, toward the apse, as if through the stone he could watch orbit. "I brought my eyes first. My ears. My hammer will follow." "Good order," Jinwoo said. Hera's voice came from the side aisle, thin and careful. "Lord Inquisitor." Kailas turned his head. The medic held herself ramrod straight out of reflex rather than respect. "Corporal, if you're here to decide whether to burn us," she said, "do it after I take stock of who can live if we don't." She wasn't asking permission. She was asking for a reason to keep moving. "If the answer is none, tell me now." Kailas looked at her a moment and gave her the courtesy of an answer that belonged to her. "Your work is not wasted today." Hera let out a breath she had not admitted she was holding. "Then I'm going back to cursing quietly, with your leave." "You have it." She ghosted away. Kailas faced Jinwoo again. "You are not profane to the warp in the way demons are, and yet the warp hates that you stand. The astropaths sang your name and died. I wonder what they saw." Jinwoo's eyes lowered to his palm. The darkness there rippled and settled like a tired animal. "I dream," he said. "I hear the word you gave me. I did not ask for it. We name what threatens us," Kailas said, "and what we need to be true." Silence settled. Dust drifted. The Carnifex shadows remained in the doorway like art carved to frighten thieves. Kailas spoke first. "Terms. You fight with us for 72 hours, or until I say stop. You do not raise any man against his own will inside my line. If you can promise neither, say so now." Jinwoo thought. It was visible, small movements at the corner of his eyes, a flex of fingers like someone testing a bridge's ropes. "I can promise the second," he said. "I will not force your living to fight me. As for time, I do not know this world well enough to bind myself." "Unacceptable," Kalis said. "Accurate," Jinwoo said. They looked at each other and found an axis. Voss broke it, voice low, urgent, without becoming loud. "Lord, with respect, the Xenos reforming on the east approach. I can hear the ground talk about it." Kalis lifted a brow. Voss didn't blink. It wasn't metaphor. The commissar had the infantryman's ear for weight. The city had learned Tyranid footfalls the way men learn the steps of someone they love and fear. "Then we test a smaller lever," Kalis said, and turned lightly to Jinwoo. "Do this for me, Shadowcaller. Not in service." In experiment, he pointed with 2 fingers at the furthest pew, where a guardsman's corpse lay half-curled under a carved cherub. "Raise him." Doss made a sound like a scraped plate. He recognized the boots. Jinwoo looked at the body, then at Doss, then at Kalis. "Why?" "To learn whether you obey the living or your own curiosity," Kalis said. "To see whether your mercy is arithmetic or appetite." Jinwoo considered. He crouched beside the dead man and set 2 fingers lightly on the cold brow, the way you might press a coin to paper to trace its edge. "Arise," he said, not a command this time, a suggestion. The body shivered. The wound along its spine closed with a sigh like a sleeping child turning. Blue lit the eyes. The man sat up. Doss flinched, then steadied. "Pellin," he said roughly. The resurrected guardsman, Pellin, turned to the sound. He did not speak. He stood. He looked at Doss with a gaze that held a memory like a photograph. Flat, perfect, incorrect. Jinwoo looked up at Kalis. "Arithmetic," he said. "I keep what is useful. I remember what is mine." He looked at Doss. "If you want him to lay down, tell me." Doss worked his jaw. "Pellin," he swallowed. "Rest." Jinwoo touched 2 fingers to the man's brow again, and the blue went out as if snuffed between wet fingers. Pellin folded carefully back onto the stone. He looked asleep. He was not. Kalis watched the whole exchange as if it were a lecture he had assigned and was now marking. "Good," he said. "Then we can speak about lines." He turned and walked down the nave without checking whether anyone followed. They did. At the threshold he paused, head cocked slightly, as if listening to a clock in another room. "Interrogator?" "Vector confirmed," she said. "Xenos tied on the east approach. And," her mouth tightened, "a secondary disturbance north by northwest. Strong, cold. Kalis was already drawing the new map in his head. "We will keep the knights at hold until the cold arrives. Then we will introduce them to each other." Jinwoo's eyes followed the invisible line. "You bring your hammer to test whether I am an anvil or water." "I bring my hammer because I am not reckless," Kalis said. "But I speak to you first because I am not stupid." Voss's vox rasped. The operator's voice coughed into the nave. "Contact east, contact east. Warriors and gaunts, lots. Positions," Voss snapped, energy rolling through him like a man remembering why he was built. "Doss, line 2. Gilly, eyes. Kellen, breathe before you shoot." Hera had already moved, hands washing in air, clearing a space, muttering to the saints she didn't believe in until they behaved like tools anyway. Kalis glanced once at Jinwoo. Experiment time. Help them. His eyes did not harden. They did not need to. "And remember the second term." Jinwoo inclined his head, not quite a bow. "I remember what I promise." He stepped out into the hard white light of ruin. The Carnifex shadows flowed after him like a double punctuation. Along the barricade, the resurrected took their old places without being told. Miklos's blue gaze found Doss and held there, like a dog watching its first master. Jinwoo lifted his hand. The street darkened, not dimmer exactly, but deeper, as if edges had learned to drink. "Hold," he said to the dead and the shadows. They held. The first gaunts skittered into sight, black knives on legs. Warriors shouldered behind, bone swords gleaming. The hiss of acid sacs pressurized the air. A higher shape moved in their rear, chittering commands that herded the charge into a wedge. "Now," Voss said. The line spoke light. Lasfire laced the avenue. The first rank of gaunts came apart in neat, ugly segments. Warriors staggered, scorched. The wedge reformed around the corpses as if the dead were mere furniture. Jinwoo flicked 2 fingers. The furniture stood. The front rank of gaunts, now blue-eyed, turned on their living kin without a sound. They tangled legs. They stabbed. They became problems the next rank couldn't solve quickly enough. Warriors reared to strike, and the resurrected hauled them down by their own armor holes. "Left," Doss barked. "Left, left," Gili corrected his stream. Kellen breathed. Shot. Breathed again. Hera dragged a man backward by his collar and cut cloth away from a wound as if slicing an argument in half. Voss stepped onto the parapet, sword a long, straight warning. Kalis stood in the nave doorway and watched without comment. His interrogator murmured into a throat mic. The bound psyker rocked gently, whispering numbers. The Xenos tide reached the shadow wall and slowed. That was new. It didn't understand how to slow. Jinwoo's front rank simply failed to be elsewhere, and the gaunts expended claws and motion and certainty for no reward at all. The higher shape at the rear cocked its head, annoyed. Its crest flared. A signal passed. 3 Ravener things erupted from the rubble to the right, leaping like thrown harpoons. They arced over the barricade, mouths unrolling into gardens of teeth, bone blades cocked to scythe. Kellen froze. Miklos moved. He met the first Ravener in midair, Lay's gun abandoned for a bayonet that had been a man's last tool and was now an instrument. He took the thing in the throat and wrote it down, the blue in his eyes, steady as surgery. The second Ravener hit the parapet and stopped, as if a hand had been placed gently but irresistibly on its snout, and turned sideways into the wall, denting stone. The third found a Carnifex shadow's hind leg directly in the path it had mistaken for empty. It shattered its own jaw. Kellen's breath burst out of him in a noise like a sob and laugh glued together. "Miklos!" Miklos did not answer. He stood and resumed his place in the line with a neatness that made Doss's throat hurt. The Xenos' wedge buckled. Then it broke. When they ran, they did not run as animals do, with wildness. They inverted their line and carried their wounded like furniture again, already becoming the next plan. Jinwoo lowered his hand. The pressure in the air eased. "Cease," Voss called. "Stand by. Reload." The men did as told. Hera swore softly as she pushed a dressing into a belly. Gile laughed once, short and scalded. Kellen said Miklos's name again, softer, as if thinking volume might wake a memory. Kalis stepped down off the threshold and covered the distance to Jinwoo without hurrying. He stopped the agreed 2 paces away. "Acceptable," he said, for an opening statement. Jinwoo looked at him. "You are thinking about the hammer. I am thinking about the other disturbance," Kalis said. "And about how hammers are happiest when given a nail that fights back." As if the line had been waiting for the cue, the Vox on Voss's belt snarled with a new timbre, low, like an organ note. "Lord," the interrogator said, voice thin under compression. "Secondary contact north by northwest is arrived. Identity, unknown. Psychic wake, minimal. Heat, armored. Devotional signature. Strong Voss heard it too, half-turned, and a look crossed his face that Doss had never seen there. Not fear, exactly. Recognition of a story soldiers told when drunk and forgot when sober. Kaelus's eyes brightened by a degree men mistake for light. Now, he said very quietly, we test the collision. He looked at Jinwoo. A final term for our experiment. You will not raise them. Who? You will know them, Kaelus said. They smell like oaths. Jinwoo's gaze rested easy on Kaelus's face for a moment, then slid toward the end of the boulevard where the heat haze thickened without temperature and the light felt ordered. Very well, he said. I will let your silver men keep their sleep. Kaelus almost smiled. Polite monarch. I didn't say yes to the name. You don't have to, Kaelus said. The galaxy already did. He lifted 2 fingers. Somewhere high above, something answered that signal with a sound like a hymn slammed into a magazine. The Grey Knights were coming, and for the first time since Seoul, Sun Jinwoo felt the curve of a rule he had not written approach him like weather. They came like falling chapels. Gunships split the cloud belly and descended on thrusters that shook prayer out of loose stone. Their hulls were adamant carved into angles that suggested scripture. Buttressed intakes, purity seals lacquered hard to keep them from whipping free. Hazard chevrons so crisp they looked like they'd been painted onto the air. The engine's basso hum pressed against the lungs and made even confident men count their breaths. Holy throne, Kellen whispered, forgetting to be afraid and remembering it in the same heartbeat. There, silver. Grey Knights, Guille said, and the way he said it put distance between the words and himself, as if touching a hot pan with tongs. Commissar Voss did not speak. He removed his hat. Someone had returned it to him without comment and tucked it under his arm. The gesture wasn't respect. It was a tightening of lines before the strike. Lord Inquisitor Kaelus stood straight as a spear on the lip of the avenue, coat hem twitching in the exhaust. His retinue had vanished to the edges, becoming shadows with notebooks and angles. The bound psyker knelt where the cathedral's shade could fall across him, whispering multiplication tables of litanies. The interrogator's hand hovered near the null rod at her spine like a calm thought ready to be spoken. Sun Jinwoo squinted against the grit scudding off the landing zone. The Carnifex shadows crouched behind him, patient and immense, their bodies reading the ground with each claw as if the street were a page and they had learned letters late but well. His resurrected line stood in a silence that had become a habit. Blue eyes steady, muzzles pointed down. The stillness of a parade that would never be held in daylight. The first gunship set down with a final growl and cut its engines. Ramp, pistons, a hiss of pressure. Then the first of them walked into the ruined light. Silver, not polished, consecrated. Armor covered in hand-carved script, each letter the size of a nail head, each word a scar that had chosen its own body. Their pauldrons wore strikes and devotions. Their helms were blunt, vowel-less faces with eye slits that considered rather than saw. Terminator plate on the first 3. Walking vaults with weapons like arguments, warded halberds, a hammer that hummed as if the air were a rival. At their front, a Justicar removed his helm with deliberate hands and let the ruins see a human face. It was broad, that face, not handsome, but assembled with the symmetry of men who have never lied to themselves. His hair was iron. His eyes were the color of old slate. He had the look of someone who had memorized the names of his dead and carried them like coin. He descended the ramp and the others followed as if the gravity obeyed his boots. Emperor Witness, Hera said softly, not because she meant it, but because we are made of our first languages. They brought saints with trigger discipline. Kalis inclined his head the smallest degree. Justicar, Lord Inquisitor. The Justicar's voice was a bell heard through walls. He didn't raise it. He didn't need to. You requested our hand. I requested your accuracy, Kalis said. There is a distinction. The Justicar's gaze moved to Jinwoo, and for the first time since he'd awoken in this world, Jinwoo felt being seen by something that did not care whether it could understand him. The Justicar did not sniff for warp taint. He did not search for the telltale itch of a demon's oily presence. His attention landed on the fact of Jinwoo and began, rigorously, to measure. Name, the Justicar said. I have one, Jinwoo replied. It is the custom, the Justicar said, and the small kink of his mouth made the sentence dry rather than cruel. Sun Jinwoo, and the title they scream. The Justicar's gaze did not waver. Rex Umbrarum, do you accept it? No. Good. He set his helm under his arm. Then, for now, you are Sun Jinwoo. You will submit to examination. Kalis's head tilted a hair. He did not correct. He would let the knight play the opening, testing whether the board was as square as it appeared. Jinwoo's answer was ordinary, almost conversational. What does examination look like? A test of your nature. The Justicar's eyes flicked once to the Carnifex shadows and once to the resurrected line. We will attempt to unmake what you have made. If you are demonic, it will come apart as lies do in good hands. If not, it will teach me your grammar. And if I refuse? The Justicar did not reach for his weapon. He did not need to. Then you declare your grammar, and I answer with mine. Silence. Sand scuffed past. Somewhere down a side street, a Tyranid shrieked at nothing and was answered by nothing. Kalis said, without looking away from Jinwoo, you promised not to raise my knights. I keep promises, Jinwoo said. Then allow them their attempt, Kalis murmured. It makes our next decisions bearable. Jinwoo considered that. He looked at the resurrected Myklos, at Doss, at Kellen's white-fingered grip, at Guile's tokens pressed into a palm until they made dents. He looked at the Carnifex shadows, and they looked back the way mountains might look back, without judgment, with patience. All right, he said, and opened his hand. A tremor moved through the dead like a breath taken collectively. The blue steadied. The line remained. He was not offering them. He was telling the knights where the door was, and leaving it unlocked. The Justicar nodded once, a craftsman acknowledging a bench left clean. Brother Librarian, he said, and one of the silver giants stepped forward, helm still on, stave crowned, with a book of steel whose pages were folded shut by chains. Script crawled his armor like ivy. When he spoke, the words disturbed the dust. By the Emperor's light, by Titan's oath, by the blood of martyrs, I loose the ward. The air did not shimmer. It tightened. The smell was not incense or ozone, but something colder. Iron left in snow. Letters shaped themselves briefly in the space between his gauntlet and the line of dead. Sigils of denial. Runes that had chased demons through their own reflections. The librarian's will pressed forward like a slow, inevitable door. The nearest resurrected guardsman, Pellin, shivered. Blue dimmed in his eyes. His head drooped the smallest degree. Kellen's breath caught in his teeth. Don't. Quiet, Doss rasped. But there was plea in it. The librarian pushed. His voice did not rise. It deepened. The sigil stepped into the resurrected man as if into water and disappeared. Pellin straightened. The blue burned again, clear and untroubled. He lifted his chin like a man being fitted for a collar he had decided against. Again, the Justicar said. The librarian's helm turned minutely. The second ward unfurled, a more exacting geometry, a cord laid around the soul's throat and pulled just so. The temperature at the back of Jinwoo's tongue dropped. His exhales fogged briefly in air that had no right to be that cold. Two resurrected faltered this time. One took a knee, the other raised a hand to his temple as if listening to a noise he didn't want to confess. Jinwoo watched without moving. He felt the pressure like weight on a bar across his shoulders. He could shed at any time. He did not. He tested the joint instead, the way a fighter tests where the pain begins and whether it announces injury or instruction. Again, the Justicar said, and there was something like fatigue in the single word, not with the task, but with the universe that required it from him so often. The third ward was not a loop. It was a line, a simple, vicious refusal. It did not ask the soul to let go. It told the world to unclasp. The resurrected line responded as a unit. They tilted under it, like wheat in a brief wind. Miklos's eyes filmed, cleared, filmed again. He swayed. Doss took half a step before he remembered not to insult the line by catching a man who had stood in it longer than he had been living. "Steady, trooper," he said, voice low. Miklos steadied. The librarian exhaled. The stave's head lowered a fraction. The book stayed shut. "Enough," the Justicar said, not unkindly. He looked at Kalis, then at Jinwoo. "Your constructs are not warp-stitched. They are held by something colder. Memory," Jinwoo said. "Possession," the Justicar corrected. "You do not own the dead because a god permitted it. You own them because you remember harder than the world does." Jinwoo let that sit. "And what does that make me to you?" "A man with a talent that can be taught to behave." The Justicar lifted his helm and settled it with a hiss of seals. When he spoke again, the Vox shaded his voice with a metallic patience. Or a heresy that can't. He stepped forward one pace. The knights behind him shifted. No clatter, no scrape. The choreography of heavy things that had learned to move like ideas. "Trial by blades," the Justicar said. "If you are not demon, you will not break. If you are not God, you will not enjoy this." Voss's sword sang quietly to life. He didn't speak. Kalis did. "Parameters," the Inquisitor said. "No collateral beyond what has already been wasted," the Justicar answered. "The line holds. The guardsmen do not interfere. We test his resistance, not his wrath." Kalis's chin moved the smallest centimeter. "Agreed." Jinwoo flexed his fingers. The shadows pooled and gathered, not like an army now, but like a thought he had decided to complete. "Very well," he said. "Teach me your grammar." The first blow came from a man wielding a warded halberd whose haft was older than the city. He moved without flourish, a precise step and cut designed to cleave an arm at the tricep and disarm what could be disarmed. The blade met Jinwoo's forearm and sank, not into flesh, into absence. The metal slid with a tight, awful smoothness through a space that had opinions about edges. The knight had the discipline not to wrench. He simply adjusted, pivoted, angled for a hook that might catch bone. Jinwoo closed his hand around the haft. The wards screamed. Runes flared along the blade and died in a sequence that looked like shock. The halberd stopped being leverage and became ornament. Jinwoo released it before he made it a memory. The knight recovered with a neatness that would have made a swordmaster nod. "Again," the Justicar said, and the second blow came from a hammer. The knight wielding it swung as men swing who do not fear their own weapons. The head hummed, not electrically, but in the way cathedrals hum when you stand in the center and listen to the past. It struck Jinwoo square in the chest. The street rang. The sound traveled down into the under avenues and pushed dust out of long dead vents. Doss felt it in his molars. Hera felt it in the quick of her nails. Kellen felt it in his eyes and blinked tears for a reason that had nothing to do with pain. Jinwoo took one step back, not from damage. He had not been hurt, but because the blow had contained a meaning and he wanted to read it fully. "Better," he said, and the knight whose hammer sang did not respond. He had not asked a question. "Form Sigma," the Justicar said. The knights shifted, two flanked, one forward, one back. A small geometry resolved in the air around Jinwoo. Humidities of intention, pressures of will. The librarian's stave turned, pages glinting under their chains as if they wished to be consulted and knew they would not be. They pressed. The halberd's edge wrote clean, bright lines in the air. The hammer punctuated them. A sword. He hadn't seen the sword until it moved, drew a simple arc toward his knee with the kind of modest technique that kills kings. Jinwoo didn't dissolve or leap. He stepped into the arc and let the blade pass through a leg that ceased being present for the span of the cut and returned on the other side of it. His hand found the sword's flat and introduced it briefly to friction. The knight adjusted. Angular momentum resolved. Their wrists found compromise. It was almost polite. Behind them, the resurrected line stood very still. They had known battles with screaming. This one wrote in quiet. "Enough probing," the Justicar said, and the librarian finally moved for blood. Not blood, for definition. Wards climbed Jinwoo like vines, seeking purchase, denying angles. A halo of script formed above his head, letters turning in counter-rotations, like gears that did not touch, and yet transferred force. The air crystallized again, iron and snow, null adjacent. Jinwoo felt the pressure enter him and find no purchase. It moved through shadows and found only more of itself. He let it look. He let it push. He learned the feel of it, its weight, its edge, its hunger. "Your light doesn't find me," he said to the librarian, as one technician to another. "My light finds everything," the librarian answered, calm and incorrect. Jinwoo sighed, and the ward slid off him like rain leaving no wet. The hammer came again. He caught the head in one hand. It thrummed under his palm like a living animal angry at the leash. "Stop," Jinwoo said, not command, not plea, notation. The knight obeyed. He didn't mean to. His body remembered orders from a monastery that didn't include this voice. He froze anyway. The hammer sagged. Jinwoo let it go before he made the habit too easy. The Justicar lowered his chin. "You are not demon. No. You are not God. No. Then you are a man committing a theology." Jinwoo's mouth crooked. "I am committing to my own gravity." The Justicar's helm tilted as if to examine the phrase from different angles. "Can you hurt us?" "Yes," Jinwoo said, unadorned. "Will you?" He looked over the knight's shoulder at Voss, who had not moved, at Doss and Hera and Kellen and Guile, who had moved only to breathe. He looked at Kalus, whose hands were still clasped behind his back as if holding the world's spine. He looked at the librarian, whose wards had found no sin to bite, only unfamiliar law. "Not if you don't insist," Jinwoo said. The Justicar's helm nodded as if a weight had moved one notch closer to balance. "Then we pass from test to treaty." "Is that what this is?" Kylus asked, mild. "A treaty? It is a definition," the Justicar said. "He is neither our favored prey nor our favorite lie. He is outside, which means he is inside our problem. Classification, Kalis said, and the word was less a request than the clicking of a lock. Not demon, not psyker. The librarian finally removed his helm. His eyes were old, but not tired. His mouth was set in an expression that had no civilian analog. Not null, not pariah. Sovereign locus with necromantic agency, anchored autonomy. He looked at Jinwoo without disdain, a king without a throne, yet Rex Umbrarum, Kalis said softly, making the title a line in a ledger rather than a curse in a choir. Jinwoo exhaled. The Carnifex shadows eased a fraction, claws scritching stone in a sound that promised patience and suggested hunger. Your experiment is concluded, he asked. For now, Kalis said. Next experiment is proximity under stress. Meaning, Voss asked, never taking his eyes off the space where the next wave would come from. He had begun to hear the ground again, the mutter of massing, the rhythm of a mind pulling its knives into one hand. Meaning we fight together and see which of our shapes breaks first, Kalis said. If we shatter around him, he is a liability we quarantine in fire. If he holds our line without distorting it, he becomes a tool we hate correctly. The Justicar's Vox clicked as he toggled to a squad net none of the others could hear. A beat later, 4 more gunships howled as they shifted to Steel Sky Overwatch. The librarian's stave came to rest in the arc that had ended 100 wars and begun a handful. Jinwoo turned his head, just enough to catch Doss's eye. If you die, he said, you can rest. Doss swallowed. With respect, sir, permission to stand anyway. Jinwoo nodded. Permission. Kellen choked, half a laugh, half a sob. Gilly flexed his fingers and let the tokens rest, not squeezed, just held. Hera tightened a tourniquet with her teeth and spat the bit of cloth into the dust. The Tyranids came, not in a confused boil, in a decision. Warriors layered behind gaunts, chitin matte with filth, eyes black with the impatience of mouths. A monstrous synapse beast rode the back of the surge, skull crested, brain pulsing under thin armor, its will corralling a flood into a spear. Lictors ghosted the edges, cloaks failing only when they struck. Spore mines bubbled on threads of mucus, bobbing like obscene lanterns over the charge. On me, the Justicar said, and the knights closed like a fist you'd mistaken for an open hand. Librarian, countercall. Deny the spore song, denying, the librarian said, and the air tasted briefly of a library that had burned cold instead of hot. Commissar, Kalis said, and Voss's blade brightened as if smiling cruelly. Hold. Boros 18th, Voss roared, and his voice matched the engine hum and made both sound like orders. By ranks, on the second count, not the first. Keep your saints where they belong and your barrels where they go. Fire. The first light stitched the front rank of gone and made them into arithmetic. The second count, blessedly delayed, caught the warriors stepping over their dead and wrote disagreement into their legs. A spore mine drifted within arm's length of Hera and met a bolt that turned it into a lesson about surface tension and regret. Jinwoo lifted his hand. His shadows met the wave with the gravity of a tide that had checked its calendar and come on time. The Carnifex twins plunged, black crowns low, shoulders breaking like ships through a floor of bodies. The resurrected line didn't scream, didn't sing. They inserted themselves into joints, into timing, into habit. The Tyranids found themselves slowed, then stuck, then suddenly alone. The Grey Knights struck the heart. They moved like a theorem written by a man in love with knives. No flourish, no cruelty, certainty made muscular. Warded edges parted armor and were not punished for their honesty. The hammer found a synapse beast's skull and did not crush it so much as introduce it to a better ending. The librarian's stave denied a lictor's existence without raising his voice. And between their strokes, the Justicar traded glances with Jinwoo as craftsmen do when they share a bench for the first time. Small nods, minute corrections, acknowledgments of pressures and releases. Kylus watched all of it in the cold way an abacus watches a prayer. When the second synapse surge shivered in the air, a ripple in the mass mind like the breath a choir takes before the next verse, he said very quietly, "Now." The interrogator's null rod came up. The bound psycher's whispering litanies sharpened and then cut off entirely. Across the avenue, 4 melta-charges that had been furniture became intent. Heat flowered, contained, nasty, perfect, not against the surge, against the flanks that would have made a pocket out of the guardsmen and forced Jinwoo to choose between saving pieces and saving position. The rubble there slumped obediently into glass. The lictors on that vector realized they had never been there. The wave faltered. Jinwoo sensed the hesitation the way a fisherman feels a net go slack. He leaned forward. Shadows failed to be elsewhere in front of fleeing gaunts. The Carnifex twins split a warrior phalanx down a seam. The phalanx had not admitted existed. Miklos stepped, stabbed, withdrew, and did not look to the left or right for confirmation because his eyes remembered one direction with terrible clarity. "Cease," Voss called at the precise second killing had stopped being production and started being art. Hold, check, breathe. Silence fell like a sheet pulled over a body. The city panted through broken teeth. A gaunt wheezed once in the gutter and then remembered not to. The Grey Knights stood unbowed. Their purity seals had blackened at the edges. Their armor wore new scripture written in grime. The Justicar turned his helm toward Jinwoo and then toward Kylus. "Provisional conclusion," he said. "He is not a demonic event. He is an anomalous sovereign whose presence does not corrupt the faithful. His utility outweighs his offense under present conditions." Kylus nodded as if a bead had slid to the correct notch. "Filed." He faced Jinwoo. Up close, his eyes were not cruel, just clean. "Next experiment concludes with a verdict." "Verdicts," Voss said softly, not objecting, correcting the number. Kylus inclined his head, granting the plural. "Verdicts." Jinwoo's hand lowered. The pressure in the air stepped back like a courteous guest. The Carnifex twins settled on their haunches, steam whispering from chitin that wasn't chitin anymore. "What happens after your verdict?" Jinwoo asked. "We try to control what cannot be owned," Kylus said. "We settle for containment." He glanced toward orbit, where the Aegis Votum hung like a coin balanced on edge. "Or we fail and pretend that was the plan." The Justicar replaced his helm fully and locked it. "If you break faith," he said, "no threat, only line. I will find you." Jinwoo nodded as if told a predictable forecast. "If you become my problem, I will fix you." Voss exhaled through his nose, something like humor hidden in the sound. Hera wiped her hands and discovered blood that wasn't her own and grimaced at the bookkeeping that implied. Doss clapped Kellen once on the shoulder and did not flinch when the boy flinched. Kylus lifted his rosette, not to show it, but to feel the weight. "By authority vested," he said, "I designate the anomaly Rex Umbrarum in all official communications, pending final sanction." His voice did not change when he added very quietly, "We name what we must survive." The Vox on Voss's belt hissed. The operator's voice stumbled out of it like a drunk finding the street again. "Sir, fresh contact west, not Xenos." human signatures, armored, markings, ecclesiarchy adjunct. Number Skitarii, negative. They, by the throne, sir, they're chanting. Kalus's gaze slid toward the west like a blade drawn without hurry. The Justicar turned his body. Jinwoo closed his eyes for a heartbeat and listened to the ground. Boots. Too many. Discipline that sounded like hunger. Banners that scraped the air the way knives scrape plates. What now? Hera asked no one. Another flavor of salvation. Kalus's mouth made the shape of a tired man refusing to yawn. Another experiment, he said. And then the verdict. Jinwoo opened his eyes. The shadows lifted their heads. Then let's keep learning, he said, and the city, which had finally started to believe it could rest, remembered it could not. Ending moments later, the ground shifted, not from Tyranid tread, not from engines, from deeper. The silence inside Jinwoo's skull became a taut wire, humming. Shadows at his feet lengthened, not outward but downward, as if the world itself had become a well. Cold air rose, carrying the smell of stone not yet quarried, darkness not yet spent. The Carnifex shadows lifted their heads, restless. The resurrected faltered, their blue light guttering like candles in a sudden draft. Jinwoo felt the pull, familiar, terrible, like the system dragging him into a dungeon. Only this time, it pulled him out. Another dungeon, he murmured. Or home. Librarian staggered, stave rattling, not warp, not void, elsewhere. It drags him. Kalus's eyes flared the smallest degree. Contain it, but there was nothing to contain. The shadows themselves betrayed him, flowing down into the pit, abandoning form, returning to some deeper wellspring. The Carnifex twins bowed their heads, then unraveled into mist. One by one, Jinwoo's soldiers' eyes dimmed, until Maklos was the last. He looked once at Doss, memory etched in blue fire, and then went dark. The guardsman flinched as if losing him a second time. Jinwoo staggered, steadying himself against the invisible gravity pulling from beneath. He looked at Voss, scarred and stubborn. At Doss, jaw tight, refusing to grieve. At Hera, smoke trembling in her fingers. At Kellen, white-knuckled on his lasgun. At Kalus, whose face was the ledger of men who had written truths they did not want, but accepted anyway. "I don't kneel," Jinwoo said, voice low but carrying. "Remember that." The pit yawned wide. Shadows swallowed his legs, his chest, his arms. Kalus took one sharp step forward. "Sun Jinwoo," but he was gone. The street sealed smooth, as if nothing had ever broken. Silence. The Grey Knights lowered their weapons. The guardsman breathed as though surfacing from water. Voss replaced his hat. Kalus stared at the sealed stone, pale eyes calculating. "Record it," he said finally, voice soft as a knife. "Designation stands. Rex Umbrarum, a sovereign anomaly. If he returns, sanction is immediate." The Justicar inclined his helm. "He will return. Nothing that resists like that leaves without the intent to come back." Voss exhaled through his teeth. "Then throne help us when he does." Jinwoo woke to a familiar hum. Seoul's skyline, neon and steel, the traffic's low thrum, the smell of dust and food carts. And above it, a system window blinking into life as if nothing had happened. System notification, emergency quest complete. Title, The Nameless World. Objective, survive in a world without system guidance. Endure judgment from gods, men and monsters. Return intact. Hidden. Objective, be named by a world that has no place for you. Fulfilled. Completion. Status. Success. Reward. None. Note: the system cannot measure what you have become. He stared at it until it faded. The silence in his skull remained, and at his feet, the shadows moved, not just following, but waiting, heavier, hungrier. This concludes our story. Thank you for listening.